Hi there. This is a video in response to a number of requests over the years from people who've been asking me to do some kind of tutorial on the differences between all the limes, because people are getting a little bit confused, and I can't blame them because there's a lot of lime out there. There's natural hydraulic lime 2, 3.5, 5, there's lime putty, there's Quicklime as well. That's kind of a new thing to the market. Not many people were using it 20 years ago. Everybody was using NHL, and the reason, and basically rather than lose myself with some kind of diatribe concerning natural hydraulic limes, I'll come back to them in a little bit and give you a little bit of information about them, so that you can make up your own mind as to what's good or not. Lime hydrate, natural hydraulic lime, Quicklime, lime putty, and I'm going to start off with the Quicklime. Now, ultimately, this is it. Okay, you can get it in granular form. Some people call it kibble, some people call it lump. They're rather small lumps in comparison to the size that they used to be back in the day when they'd come out of the kiln, because what Quicklime is burnt limestone rock. If you take a dry stone wall and you put it in a kiln and you heat it for a certain amount of time at a certain temperature, it will burn, and all the carbon will be burnt out of it, and you'll end up with white stone or very light coloured stone like that. This is ultimately it's stone. Now, a lot of people worry about Quicklime because they think it's dangerous, and it is, but in its inert form like this, it isn't. Right? I have no worries at all. Right? If I just washed my hands, didn't dry them, and then dug in for a big handful of Quicklime, then I'd be in trouble, and I'll show you why right now. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to move from Quicklime onto lime hydrate, because there's a lot of confusion about lime hydrate. I think builders in the 1980s were using it because they thought it was, in response to people saying, "Can I have lime mortar?" And in a lot of cases, it just wasn't working. And pointing they were doing was falling out, and people were very unimpressed with lime hydrate. But I'll just tell you what lime hydrate is. Right? Lime hydrate is this. Right, which has had some water added to it to hydrate it, but not too much. Right, if I add a little bit of water here, what I'm actually doing is slaking it to a hydrate. Okay, which means it's starting to break down a bit. Add a little bit more water, because I just want it to absorb sufficient water to break down, turn to a powder. So that's starting to happen. I'm doing it gradually. Right, because if I put all the water in and I allow the lime to slake, what I then have is lime putty. So, a bit stickier than I wanted it. But this right at the minute is a kind of a cross between a lime putty and a hydrate. Okay, so I've chucked a bit too much water in. So I'll chuck a bit more water in, do a little bit more slaking, right? And we have something which is quite sticky, okay, and hot. Now, this now needs to mature for about 4 months. And a lot of people think that the way to make lime putty is to take lime hydrate, that is lime which has been already slaked, put it in a tub and add water to it, right? You have made a lime putty, but you haven't made lime putty. What you've done is you've run lime hydrate to a putty, right? So all the Americans, it does make me laugh when I see videos from by the Americans who were saying, "Hey, I've just made lime putty," and I'm thinking to myself, well, you haven't actually. What you've done is actually added water to lime hydrate, and you've run a hydrate to a putty, right? It is a putty, but it's not lime putty, right? So once this lime putty has been allowed to mature for a while, you then have lime putty, right? So it's exactly the same. It's just that when you buy it, when you buy lime putty in a tub, all the slaking's been done for you. Now, traditionally, lime putty like this was only ever used for top coat plastering. It was never actually used for pointing. It's far too expensive to use. It's far too labour intensive to use for lime plastering and lime pointing. You know, nobody's really interested in going out there digging lime pits and slaking all this lump lime and leaving it there for 4 months, 6 months, 12 months just to hoof it out of the ground and combine it with some sand and point or plaster or whatever, right? The putty thing, the putty mortar, which is, here's some I prepared earlier. I mixed this over a week ago, and I haven't, this is just the last of a batch, right? I was actually just using it. Ironically, I was actually using it for a bit of pointing, and the reason why I was doing that was because it was decorative pointing and the aggregates needed to be shown off. So because putty is very light, when you make a putty mortar with sand and you do some brushing, you'll expose the aggregates and it'll all look very pretty. But apart from aesthetics, there's actually no reason to use lime putty in a pointing mortar. And one of the reasons I don't really recommend it is because it's non-hydraulic, and there's a difference between a non-hydraulic putty mortar and a hot mix mortar. Now, I'll just show you what a hot mix mortar is basically. You take your quicklime and you add water to it, then you put your sand on top of it and you let it bake, right? That's then a pointing mortar. You can add whatever you want to it. It's also a good rendering mortar as well, because it's really high in free lime, right? The differences in free lime between, you know, the natural hydraulic limes and the non-hydraulic limes is huge, right? But this has got, the putty's got quite a high water content, which means that it'll go off really, really slowly. So if you're using it outside, maybe on a north-facing wall, you could be waiting forever for it to go off. I don't like to use it simply for that reason. It's all right if you're using it at height. I mean, it is actually, it's what's called an air lime, right, which means it's only meant to be used in the air. It's only ever meant to be used above ground. When you're using it at ground level, so when you're finishing, say for example, a gable end and you're on the base of a house, because hot air rises, it'll send off the putty that's on the apex, but it's cool, damp air at the base of a property, and so it'll take a lot longer for it to go off. Coupled to the fact that the ground 9 times out of 10 is moist, so if you want your putty to go off at the base of a property, you've got to be using it sort of. You cannot use it when temperatures are below 10 degrees, because it just takes too long to go off, and it can suffer from frost damage, and you know you've really got to add a pot's land to it, and you know. So I tend to use putty simply just for top coat plastering, mixed with fine sand, mixed with marble dust. That's as far as my putty use is concerned. What I do is just slake my own lime in situ. I make hot mix mortar for rendering, for plastering, just because I can make up a batch on the day. I can decide how much I want. I'm not limited by quantities, whether it's small, whether it's large, right? And I object to paying huge amounts of money to transport this, which is predominantly water. Well, predominantly water. It's got a lot of water in it. When you pop the top off, you've got water over the top of it, and you don't really need that, because once these are factory sealed, they're airtight. You don't need any water. I object to paying for the transport of water when I've got plenty on site, and I can just add it to my Quicklime, and I can make a hot mix mortar. So this is your kibble, right? What you also have, kibble's a firm favourite of mine because it expands, and so you get greater volume. So you actually get more lime in your lime. And the Quicklime, incidentally, is what's called, it's either called called a CL80 or a CL90. Most people use CL90, and what that is, that's 90% free lime. Okay, that's available lime. That's lime available to do the setting and do all the lovely stuff and make your mortar porous and flexible. People call it breathable, but it's not breathable, because breathing is a gaseous exchange, right? So we've got our kibble. It makes that kind of noise. And what we also have is, bear with me a second. We have our powdered lime. So you know, if you want to do lump lime slaking, right? You're baking it, but this stuff you just mix in with wet sand, and you get a hot mix mortar. But you don't get the expansion that you would with kibble, right? Because this is a powder. You add water, it's going to expand a bit, but not much. So when you use kibble or lump lime, you actually get more lime for your lime, right? But you know, so what we've got here, and just as an aside, right, can't help just going off on one here. A number of people have asked me in the past, they've actually specified, they've said, oh, I don't want that, I don't want the really light mortar, I don't want that, I'd like some brown lime. And just for reference for everybody, okay, brown lime does not exist. This is an aggregate, okay? This is an aggregate. Sand is an aggregate. So, what an aggregate will do, the finer the aggregate is, the more impact it will have on the colour of your mortar. So when you use lime, you're always going to get very, 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 very light mortar, right? Extremely light mortar. You know, Tom, in some cases, you know, I sometimes say, you know, you have to prepare yourself for the lightness of the mortar that you're going to get, because this is the finest aggregate that you're going to be using, right? So you know, in comparison to horrible grey cement, right, you're going to get something which is lovely, right? And the whiteness will show off the grains of sand, right? That's how that happens. Cement's grey and therefore doesn't really show off any of your decorative sands, because whichever way you're doing it with a lime mortar, you know, your aggregates are going to be on show to a degree. So this is something which doesn't exist anymore now. This is actually Singleton Birch, well, it doesn't exist in 25 kg bags anymore. This is Singleton Birch chalk lime, CL90 Quicklime. Lovely stuff to use, very, very soft. Right, we'll get on to compressive strengths and what have you in a little bit, but I just want to show you something, right? Lime's white, but there's always the exception of the rule. Just stay there. What this is, that there is, actually it looks a lot lighter on my phone screen than it actually is, but that's brown. And what this is, it's a CL80, right? And a CL80 just means it's got 80%. It's a quicklime, ground limestone, ground burnt limestone rock. It's a quicklime, but instead of it having 90% available lime, it's got 80% available lime, and some added pozzolans. But because it's a quicklime, it might look brown, but as soon as you make a mortar out of this, what you get is white. Okay, and if you want a really white mortar, you want a really light mortar, then you use a CL80, right? It's not as aggressive as far as slaking's concerned, depending on volume that is. I use quite a lot of it because it tends to set up a bit quicker. Right, so that's your quicklimes. Now there's no way of measuring compressive strength with quicklines. In the preservation game, we're all using them because they're soft. They're much, much, much softer than the stone and the brick. They're porous, those minute capillaries through which the moisture travels are far more extensive than any other mortar. Right, if you use a cement mortar, you haven't got any capillary action at all, so any mortar that's in the property just gets trapped. Right, so this is your quicklime, right, and this is your putty. So I've showed you how to slake to a hydrate, and I've showed you how to slake to a putty, right? And we're now going to move on to natural hydraulic lime. So bear with me a second. Now here's some NHL, natural hydraulic lime, I prepared earlier. You can see, again, it's very light. So you mix this with a sand and you're going to get a very, 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 very light mortar. But you won't get it as light as quicklime because there's just less available lime in a natural hydraulic lime. Now years ago, a natural hydraulic lime was just simply a lime which had some hydraulic properties, right? Hydraulic simply means it'll set underwater, right? So non-hydraulic, air lime, right? Hydraulic lime sets underwater, sets in damp places. So you know, if you've got a damp north-facing wall to do, then you're either going to have to pozzolan the living daylights out of your quicklime mortar, right, or you use a natural hydraulic lime. Now there are different classifications. There's a 2, there's a 3.5, and there's a 5. But to complicate things, and this is where it does get a little bit complicated, the BS standards are effectively bullshit standards for lime, because it's almost impossible to standardize lime, because what I tell people, especially when they ask for internal pointing, when they say I want internal decorative work and I want it to look lovely, I'm thinking to myself, what they're actually saying to me is, Michael, take this agricultural product, and because what lime is in its natural form is a soil conditioner. it will decrease acidity, right? It adds alkalinity into the soil, to soil conditioner. Farmers will use Quicklime, they'll put it directly onto the soil. And when you see fields steaming away, it's just because the lime's slaking into the soil. And it's also stabilising the soil as well. Now, you take a natural hydraulic lime too. People say like, oh yeah, you know, natural hydraulic lime too is the softest. Therefore, when you've got, fragile masonry work or soft masonry work, then use a natural hydraulic lime too, right? But that's too general, because the problem is you have free lime contents across the board with 2, 3.5 and a 5. Now, the free lime content of a natural hydraulic lime 2 can vary tremendously, and it can be in some cases up to about 50%. With a 3.5 you get free lime contents which start roughly at about 25% going up to about sort of 45%. So a good natural hydraulic lime 3.5 can actually be better as far as available lime is concerned than the worst natural hydraulic lime 2. Right, what you're looking at is impurities in the lime and kiln time. So the fewer impurities in the lime and the less time in the kiln, natural hydraulic lime 2. Right, the more impurities you have and the more time you have in the kiln, natural hydraulic lime 5. So an NHL 5 will have roughly about 15% free lime. However, it's not as clear cut as that, and this is why people are now looking at NHLs somewhat askance, because what research teams have undertaken some science experiments to PhD level, and they've discovered all manner of things about natural hydraulic limes. Well, one of the things you can guarantee about natural hydraulic limes is that the manufacturers are all talk, right? I've been working with lime for years. I don't know how natural hydraulic lime is made, right? What I do know is two things, right? A traditional natural hydraulic lime really was natural. It would come out of the ground with a pozzolanic element to it, maybe a bit of a clay content or something, and that would help it set up more quickly. It would give it some of that early strength. But with a natural hydraulic lime, in order to get absolutely rock doesn't come out of the ground absolute, right? It's not formed as per Cecil demands of the earth, right? It comes as it comes. So you've got to do one or two things. You either leave it alone, right, or you add to it, right? So a natural hydraulic lime, in theory, should be something which has had nothing added to it, right? But in order to standardise everything and have the exact percentages, I don't actually see how that is possible. So I think in many respects, and I have a certain eminent conservation specialist, we all know who he is, who actually says that research conditions has found elements of gypsum in one of the main brands, and he's also discovered that chalk satisfies British standards criteria as lime. So a lot of these natural hydraulic limes, really, they're just impurities with chalk added to them, because it's, at the end of the day, a natural hydraulic lime is something which has been slaked to a hydrate, but it's the impurities in it which are going to set it. Right, now get this, when it comes to when it comes to sell-by dates, right, what I find particularly interesting is that modern plaster, as in gypsum, has a sell-by date on it. And if you use a modern plaster, if you use a gypsum plaster after the sell-by date, my God, you're in trouble, right? Because it'll just set. Instead of you having maybe sort of like, I don't know, an hour and a half on it on a good day, you might have 10 minutes, you might even have 20 minutes, but then it's set and you're not skimming. You've just got, you have work of art on your wall, right? Which might not comply with your customers' expectations, right? Lime, on the other hand, doesn't have any of these sell-by dates. So this natural hydraulic lime is something that I've actually had sitting around for years, because what I end up with is half a bag here, a quarter of a bag there, and I'll put that away. I think I'll just use that next week, and now I never get around to it. And something can actually be in my shed, and I mean shed, throughout for a couple of years. There'll be all sorts of stuff going on outside. There'll be winters and summers and snow and rain and freezing, and if it's a lime, it's never affected unless it's a lime hydrate, right? And this is where things change, right? Because if you buy lime hydrate and you want it to perform in the same way all the other limes do, right, it won't, because it's already been partially slaked, which means that once it's exposed to the air, or once it's been sitting around for a while, it won't set up, right? You may as well use baking soda or flour for all the effect it's going to have, right? So I tend nowadays, although I could use lime hydrate if I wanted to, there's no point, because I can buy Quicklime, putty, NHL in a bag, and I know that it's reliable, whereas a lime hydrate isn't reliable, because I don't know how old it is, I don't know how long it's been sitting around in the builder's merchants. It could have been at the bottom of a pallet, and it might have taken them months to get through that pallet, so by the time I get hold of it, it's now inert. And so I would not dare use a lime hydrate on a client's property for fear of failure. And yet, and yet I do, because when I'm using a natural hydraulic lime, there are two things I know about a natural hydraulic lime. Because there isn't very much lime in them, they're not very workable. They just don't have that plasticity. So if I'm plastering with an NHL 3.5, right, I cannot plaster. It's not effectively plastering, it's rendering. I cannot render with an NHL 5 because it has no life in it, right? The only way you can try and give an NHL 5 some life is to chuck it away, right? Because it's awful stuff. It's just awful. It's awful to try and get on a wall, right? There's not really much point in pointing with it, because it has no workability whatsoever. You need a lime which is going to be workable. Now, a Quicklime is very workable. A putty is very workable, right? But NHLs, they're not that workable. That's because of the low free lime content. Now, the NHL 3.5 seems to be for use right across the board as far as everything's concerned. Me personally, that because of its lifelessness, you're only talking about, roughly for your average NHL 3.5, you're only talking about sort of 25% available lime. The rest's just impurities. So you're effectively trying to lay on a bag of impurities mixed with some sand onto your wall. And so what I do is, if I'm using 1 lime and then 3 sand, what I'll do is I'll have a ratio of 1 to 1 to 3. And that's even if it's an NHL 2, right? Because even an NHL 2, good NHL 2 that I use, will have, say, round about 40% free lime. But it's still not as workable as far as pointing and plastering is concerned as it could be. So that 1 to 1 to 3, that's 1 NHL, 1 lime hydrate, right, to increase workability, right? Best if it's fresh, but for me, it can. If it can take me a while to get through a great big bag of a lime hydrate. So whether it's inert or whether it's fresh out the factory gates doesn't matter that much, because it's an NHL and I'm relying on the impurities in the NHL to give me that set, right? But what I then get is workability. So I'm taking something which is, you know, when you're laying on a rendering, an NHL rendering mortar, I find it sort of like really gritty and hard work. But as soon as you add that lime hydrate, in fact, I use a particular NHL2, which has got roughly around about sort of 40% free lime, but it's still a bit gritty and doesn't go on that well, and so I'm quite happy to add 2 lime hydrate to that to give me the workability that I want. And if it's fresh, then all I'm doing is I'm just either way I'm increasing the free lime content. So I'm taking an NHL, which has maybe got sort of 40% free lime, adding lime hydrate, which is bumping up the free lime content and the workability, and I'm getting a lovely plastering mortar. And what I will then do is because the emphasis nowadays is so much on heat, on retaining heat. What I always do with plastering mortar is I never just use sand. I'll reduce some of the sand. I'll include perlite, right? Because perlite will make your mortar lighter, right? And it will, because sand and lime on its own, it's hardly like PIR board or sheep's wool insulation, right? And there are so many products on the market which profess to have thermal some heat retaining qualities. You know, for a fortune, what I'd rather do is just buy me perlite and maybe have a couple of sand, a couple of perlite. You can't make an exact substitution. You can't take out one sand and add one perlite. It doesn't quite work that way. It doesn't work that way with hemp either. But a really good plastering mortar for me would be, it doesn't make any difference what lime it is, really. You know, if someone wants me to use putty, quite happy to. But hemp, in an ideal world, I'd use pumice as an aggregate, but can't afford it. You know, I mean, that really is, and you can build up and build up and build up, and you can have the most porous, the most breathable, and an extremely heat retaining plaster, which is which is absolutely natural and perfect on grade 2 listed buildings, perfect on anything. In fact, what I'm doing at the minute is, this is a 1930 semi, and it had an awful 1960s fireplace. I think these tiled fireplaces, I'm not 100% sure about these properties, because they're slightly out of my sort of catchment zone. I tend to work more on stone properties out in the sticks, the earth mortar built ones. These, on the other hand, 1930s, just as an FYI, right, they were built with lime, and they were built with quicklime. But what the builders did back in the day was they added cement, because that would give them a better compressive strength, which means they could build more quickly, which brings us back onto the subject of NHLs and compressive strengths, right? It's only St. Astia who measure compressive strengths over a longer duration than 28 days, right? What the manufacturers do is they'll give you the compressive strength after 28 days, right? That's neither use nor ornament to anybody, right? Because we all know that natural hydraulic limes increase their strength over time. So you can measure a compressive strength after 28 days, but it means nothing in comparison to 2 years down the line. And this is where the science, for me, is just not happening, because the manufacturers should be doing a lot more. I'm what's known as a need for cognition person, right? And what that means is, you know, if someone says, "Oh, yeah, that's the best," you know, I'll say, "Why?" Or I'll say, "In comparison to what?" Right? I want to know the ins and outs. I want to find the research paper. I want to have a look at the abstract. I want to have a look at format, the way all the research is laid out. I want to see if it's good research, and I want to have a look at the conclusion and the results and see what has actually been found. And what you find with the NHLs is there's absolutely no research out there whatsoever, right? There really isn't, from the manufacturers, and if there is, right, it's as good as a cosmetic product. It's as good as cosmetic product science. It's as good as a face cream research, or research into what their particular product does with people's hair. Right. What we really want to know is what's the eventual compressive strength after about 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the line. Right. 28 days is just utterly, absolutely pointless. Right. That means something to builders, because it means that they can judge whether or not they can actually build a house just using an NHL 3.5. Most builders don't build with NHL 3.5s. They build with cement. A compressive strength is utterly pointless, right? After 28 days, it needs to be, it needs to be at least a year down the line. Only St. Astia will give you the compressive strength a year down the line. Right. So in sum, you have different limes: lime hydrate, otherwise known as bag lime, builder's lime, hydrated lime, and that is Quicklime, which has been slaked to a hydrate, right? Hasn't been slaked to a putty. Adding water to a lime hydrate does not a putty make. Although there are some people who would argue with me. However, having said that, it's not a bad thing to run a hydrate to a putty the night before. Right, because then you're really saturating it, but all this talk about, oh, I made a lime putty and I'm going to lay it down for however many months or whatever. Let me tell you this: unless something's sealed at the factory, when you get a tub of putty, right, the reason why that will remain in the state in which it was when it left the factory is because it's airtight. It's an airtight seal. Right, outside of factory conditions, it's almost impossible to create an airtight seal. Right, the only thing which will actually really do it is if you put a layer of water, right, on top of your putty or your putty mortar. Right, and as we all know, water is prone to evaporation, and if you leave it for 6 months, it'll evaporate. When you go back to it in 6 months' time, because you haven't got an airtight seal on your bucket, trug, or tub, you'll find that your lime putty is no longer lime putty. It's carbonated. Natural hydraulic limes. One of the difference between a putty is you can rework it and rework it and rework it. It makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. Non-hydraulic limes can be reworked and reworked. So if they start to stiffen up a bit, it means you can add a bit of water. If you've left a lime putty in a mixer for a week, or in your barrow for a month, and it started to stiffen up a bit, you add a bit of water, you rework it. But a natural hydraulic lime will start to go off as soon as you add water. Now, a lot of people say you can't rework natural hydraulic limes. Well, if you look through the videos that I've done, you'll find that I have evidence to suggest the opposite. One of the things about, say for example, a natural hydraulic lime 3.5 is that the strength gains are progressive. And I've reworked natural hydraulic limes again and again and again. And I've tested the efficacy of their strength as far as pointing is concerned. And they are just a little bit too hard for me. So if I'm going to get a natural hydraulic lime 3.5, I don't mind reworking it sort of 2 or 3 times, because it'll reduce its strength just a little bit, but it doesn't reduce it to plasticine or something like that. You don't put a reworked natural hydraulic lime, in a stone building and have it fall out over the first winter. It just doesn't work like that. It's packed full of impurities. It's a cementitious mortar. It goes off. But if you want to be absolutely pedantic about it, then the only lime the only NHL that you can rework, that you have permission to rework, is St Astia NHL2, and the reason for that is because it's got a very high free lime content. In addition, as well, just something that I ought to point out, there's a difference in the colours between the natural hydraulic limes. So, say for example, Cecil will make your eventual result look a little bit on the grey side. Barcelona, if you want that brown lime that everybody's talking about, the best you'll get is Barcelona. Barcelona is a place in France, right? That's so German it could be Third Reich, because it's just a few miles away from the German border. So they pretty much speak sort of, you know, German, and they do this lime, and it's a really high free lime content lime, and the 3.5 is a high free lime content mortar. The 2 is a high free lime content mortar in comparison to the likes of Cecil, you know, which you know, I gave up using that as soon as I started using St Astia. And the reason I liked St Astia was because it comes from a different rock. Cecil comes from argillaceous rock, which is high in clay, right? But St Astia comes from siliceous or silicious rock, which isn't, right? And it's burnt differently, so you get a whiter lime than Cecil. So when you're using a St Astia, particularly a St Astia NHL2, you'll find it a lot more workable. And if decorative is your thing, and you like to brush back and show the aggregates, because of its lightness, because of the coal that it's actually burnt with, you will show your aggregates off better. And when you see a property that's been repointed with the St Astia NHL2, it looks much better than something that's been done with a Cecil. In fact, a St Astia NHL2, in comparison to a St Astia NHL 3.5, are poles apart. They're two completely different houses. I don't think there's anything else that I can mention to you. Just one thing. So with NHLs, they already have these naturally occurring pozzolands in them. How natural they are, I don't know. At one time, like I say, you used to get natural hydraulic lime, which was just it was quicklime out of the ground with some impurities in it, which meant that it gave it a bit of a pozzolanic set. Nowadays, NHLs far exceed the original non-classified NHLs. So, you know, but your quicklimes have no information whatsoever about compressive strength, and it's completely unnecessary because they're soft, you know, but they're harder than the earth mortar with which perhaps your old cottage is built with, you know. So maybe it's time for the British Standards Institute to take another look at natural hydraulic limes and how they're classified. You know, maybe it's actually time for the British Standards Institute to have a look at some research. You know, there's some really good PhD research out there at the minute. Maybe the British Standards Institute should go and have a look at it, you know, and identify potential changes which could be made in the classifications, because they're so loose, you know. So for me, you know, NHLs do have a place. You know, they certainly have a place in history, because the conservation department and the architects and whoever, you know, they welcomed the NHLs in with open arms. But it's time to sort of like start thinking, do we actually need them? Because once you take a quicklime and you add a porcelain to it. My favourite porcelain's Trass. And the reason for that is because it's easily available and it's cheap, and you can just chuck it in. You know, it depends. You know, some people just like a bit of wood ash. You know, but not everybody's got a wood burning stove. And you know, I've seen me throughout winters just gather the ash from the grate, sift out the nails from the pallets and what have you that I've been burning, and I will use wood ash all throughout the year. But sometimes I'm in a position where I either can't be bothered to have real fires, or I'm living somewhere where there isn't a wood burner or a real fire, and so I'll just simply use Trass, and I can increase or decrease the amount of Trass I put into a quicklime mortar to influence its strength. You know, like say for example, if I'm going to be using a quicklime mortar in April or May, then I might only put sort of 5% Trass, maybe 2% Trass into a quicklime mortar, because I know it's going to have May, June, July, August, September, October. It's going to have 6 months to carbonate, to build up strength before we hit the winter. But if I'm using a quicklime in the middle of winter, then, well, you know, I'm going to use a bit more Trass, because I want my quicklime mortar to go off a little bit quicker. I want to introduce some early strength to it. So all in all, putties, lime hydrate, quicklime kibble, quicklime powder, different in colours. And don't forget, when it comes to the colour of your mortar, the sharp sand will not influence the overall colour. That just influences the texture to a degree. What will influence the colour of your mortar are the fines. So if you're using a quicklime or something which is very high in available lime, like a St. Nastia NHL2, you get a very light mortar. You know, and if showing off the aggregates is your thing, then a quicklime or an NHL2 will show them off more. But just as a point of information, right, all this churn brushing that everybody does nowadays, that's a product of the lime revival. That was never done, right, in the 16 and 1700s. I'm old enough, and I've been doing this long enough to have seen, you know, to have raked out perhaps thousands of square meters of original lime, which has passed its sell-by date, right? And what it all it ever was it was just simply lime and sand and horsehair spread over the earth mortar joints, the bedding mortar joints, and left, right? There was no brushing, there was nothing. It was just onto the trowel and like that, and walk away. Right? It was a very cheap and a very quick and a very low labour intensive way of pointing a property. And you know, it looks really antiquated now, but a lot of it's sort of cracked and fallen out, seen better days. You know, so there's this brushing thing came in, because ultimately, if you just apply a lime mortar to a mortar joint on a stone cottage and walk away, it'll look rubbish. It needs decades and decades for it to carbonate and change colour, you know. And so those old mortars that were applied to your 16 and 1700 built thatch cottages cracked like buggery, you know, and all this, and there was never any ill effect. There was never any downside to cracked lime mortar. It was just something which was accepted. Trowel and walk, right? And it was the same across the entire country. It doesn't make any difference where you go. You can go to Yorkshire, you can go to Oxfordshire, Northamptonshire, Wiltshire. You'll just see the same. That's what you'll see. That's the part of the built environment from the 16 and 1700s. And those cracks never healed. So all this talk about lime self-healing, You know, lime's breathable. Well, it ain't self-healing and it ain't breathable. What it will do, it will form minute crystals in some cracks, and it will stop the cracking going any further. But you will never get a crack that you can leave which will eventually self-heal because lime is somehow, you know, made by Paul Daniels. It doesn't have magic qualities, right? Don't forget, it's an agricultural product. So if you want indoor pointing, particularly on stone, which was originally plastered and never meant to be seen, and is atrocious in comparison to nice outside stone, the amount of labour that has to go into making a feature wall with something, like I say, which was never meant to be seen, which maybe has got some of the old earth plaster on it and some lime wash and, you know, some cement and this, that and the other, you know. Whoever you ask to do it is going to be really up against it because, you know, at the end of the day, it's an agricultural product and it's just mixed with sand and horsehair. Okay, doesn't make any difference whether it's pointing mortar or plastering mortar, it's exactly the same, except for your top coat, which is putty. Right, so I think I'm actually done. It's saying 51 minutes on the screen, right? So if anybody has lasted this long, then you really are one of the world's lime aficionados. Have a badge, just pin it on you there, because you are a star. Right, if you have any questions, ask in the comment section below. And if you think this has been of any help to you, let me know. If you feel that I've missed anything, let me know. If you'd like any other kind of comparison video, you know, if there's anything I can compare, you know, then just give me a shout and I'll see what I can do. All right, thanks for listening, thanks for tuning in. Hope you have a lovely day.